The first thing I saw was her face. It wasn't in person or even on a video call, but in a blurry, dark photograph that was sent to my phone at 10:43 p.m. on a Tuesday. My phone vibrated twice on the end table, its screen lighting up the dark corner of my living room where I had been drifting off to sleep after a long 14-hour shift on base. The message didn't come with any words, just that one image. It was my grandmother Helen sitting all by herself on a hard wooden bench at the bus station in town. Her small body was hunched over inside her thin coat, and her hands were clasped tightly around her purse as if she were holding on to the last thing she owned in the world. A paper coffee cup sat empty on the floor beside her feet. She probably bought it hours ago, just to keep warm. Behind her, the station looked completely deserted. There wasn't another person in sight. The clock on the wall looked like it was frozen at 9:17 p.m. It was winter, the kind of deep, cold winter where you can see your breath freeze in the air. I could almost feel that cold seeping through her clothes, right into her bones. And then I saw something else, her expression. It wasn't sadness, and it wasn't confusion. It was resignation. It was the look of someone who had given up expecting anyone to come for her, like she had just decided she would sit there until she couldn't sit anymore. The next text arrived just seconds later, from a number I recognized immediately. It was my cousin, Chloe. "I thought you should know," it read. Your parents dropped her off here. They said they can't take care of her anymore." I had to read the message 3 times before the words actually registered in my brain. My parents had dropped off my grandmother, the woman who had practically raised me, at a bus station, as if she were a piece of luggage they didn't want, and they just left her there. My heart felt like it had dropped into my stomach. A hot, sharp feeling rose up behind my eyes. But it wasn't tears. It was a cold, focused anger. I typed back immediately. "Where are they now?" Chloe's response came quickly. "Home. They said Helen stays here until she figures something out. They don't want her back in the house." My breath came out slow and steady, the way they teach you to breathe before a mission. Except this wasn't a training drill. This was my family. My parents had always been difficult. They were not the warm, nurturing type, not to me or my siblings, and especially not to my grandmother. But this wasn't just being cold. This was outright cruelty. I looked at the clock, 10:47 p.m. I suppose I could have gotten into my car, driven the 40 miles to the station, picked her up quietly, and just driven away. That's what any normal, reasonable person would have done. But I wasn't feeling reasonable. I was feeling methodical and very clear-headed. You see, I'm not just any granddaughter. I'm a Navy SEAL. And when my team and I get involved, we don't just show up, we make sure the message is understood. I opened my contacts and scrolled to a group chat I had with my team. These were my brothers and sisters in arms, the people who had pulled me out of dangerous situations, who trusted me with their lives as I trusted them with mine. "Need a quick assist?" I typed. "Civilian retrieval, no hostile threat, but it has high symbolic value." The first reply came in less than 10 seconds. "Where and when?" I sent the photo of Helen and then the address of the bus station. By 10:52 p.m., I had my answer. 5 Humvees, my whole squad, fully kitted out. We would roll out in 20 minutes. I went to my closet and slipped into my dress blues. Not my camouflage, not my combat gear, but the formal dress uniform, the one you wear for graduations, funerals, and moments when you need the world to know exactly who you are and what you stand for. The medals lined up across my chest weren't just pieces of metal, they were proof. They were proof that I had fought hard, endured more than most, and survived things most people couldn't even imagine. Tonight, I wasn't just showing up for my grandmother. I was showing my parents and the entire town exactly what they had done. By the time I stepped outside, the night air was sharp and cut against my skin, but the low rumble I heard in the distance warmed me in a way nothing else could. Headlights, engines, the convoy was coming. The first Humvee rolled up, its tires crunching on the frozen gravel, then another and another. Soldiers hopped out, their boots hitting the ground in perfect unison, and they formed a perimeter without me even having to say a word. I climbed into the lead vehicle. "Bus station," I said. We moved out like a single unit, cutting through the dark. And I knew, before this night was over, my parents would regret every single second of what they had done. To understand why I reacted the way I did that night, you really have to understand who my grandmother is and what she means to me. Her name is Helen Clark. She's 78 years old, as sharp as a tack, with a wit so quick it could cut a person down before they even realized what was happening. She is the reason I'm able to stand on my own 2 feet, and funnily enough, she's the reason I ever decided to put on a uniform. When I was a kid, my parents weren't really present in my life. My dad was always chasing some new business deal that almost always failed before it even got started. My mom, she was far more concerned with her social standing and country club politics than with her actual family. It was Helen who packed my school lunches every day, who stitched up my torn jeans, and who sat through every single piano recital, even the ones where I played so badly that the teacher winced. She was the one who told me, Sarah, your strength isn't in how loud you can be. It's in how you refuse to break. Those words, they stayed with me. They carried me through my buds training when every muscle in my body was screaming at me to quit. But to my parents, she was just an inconvenience. They saw her as this aging burden, a constant reminder of obligations they didn't want to have. They never said it out loud, of course, but the way they would sigh when she asked for help with something, the way they shuffled her off into the smallest guest room in the house, I knew. Still, I always thought they had some basic human decency. I thought there were certain lines that they just wouldn't cross. That illusion was shattered about 3 months before the bus station incident. My grandmother had a fall in her kitchen. It wasn't catastrophic, but she needed a few weeks of physical therapy. I was deployed overseas at the time, so I called my parents and I begged them to check in on her daily. They promised me they would. They didn't. By the time I got back stateside and drove over to her house, the place was a complete mess. She had been living off canned soup and crackers because no one had bothered to go grocery shopping for her. Her laundry was piled up in the corner. She tried to play it off, saying, "Oh, I'm fine, sweetie." But I saw the truth in her eyes. That was the first time I really snapped. I confronted my parents right then and there. They just shrugged it off. They said she was stubborn, that she wouldn't accept help. Help? They had never even offered any. That's when I started visiting Helen twice a week, no matter what my own schedule was. I'd fix her leaky faucet, bring her fresh produce, and take her to her therapy appointments. I thought maybe I could balance things out. But my parents didn't like that. They saw it as me interfering with their decisions. I didn't care. Until one evening when my mom said something that just stopped me cold. "You'll understand when you have to manage someone like her. It's exhausting. Sometimes you just need to step away." Step away. She was talking about her own mother. Fast forward to the night of the photo. I had been on base all day, running a training operation with my squad. I came home completely tired, grabbed a frozen dinner, and was about to fall asleep when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. Almost. When I opened that message and saw my grandmother on that cold bench, it was like every last bit of patience I'd ever had for my parents just evaporated. I didn't need to hear the details. I didn't care about their reasoning. I knew this was intentional. They didn't drop her off there by accident. They wanted her gone, out of sight and out of mind. And here's the thing. When you've served in the military long enough, you develop a kind of sixth sense for how urgent a mission is. You know when something can wait until morning and when it absolutely cannot. This was the latter. I could have just picked her up, driven her to my place, and let the whole thing fade away quietly. But that would have sent the wrong message. I wanted my parents and anyone else who thought they could treat family like this to feel the full weight of their actions. That's why I didn't just drive over. That's why I called my squad. That's why I decided this wouldn't just be a retrieval. This was going to be a statement. As the Humvees rolled through the sleeping streets, I pictured Helen's face when she saw us coming for her. I pictured the look on my parents' faces when they heard the engines outside their house later that night. And for the first time in years, I felt something that was close to peace. Because I knew that by the end of tonight, they would understand exactly who they were dealing with. I keep my personal and professional lives separate most of the time. My teammates know me as Clark, the one who doesn't crack under pressure, the one who will volunteer for the nastiest assignments without blinking. But that night, I brought them into something deeply personal. I sent out that group text, "Need wheels and bodies, 30 minutes, no questions, non-lethal, OP." They didn't hesitate. That's the thing about SEALs. When one of us calls, the others answer no matter what. 10 minutes later, my phone was buzzing with confirmations. By the time I rolled up to the motor pool, 5 Humvees were already idling under the sodium lights, their exhaust curling into the night air like smoke. I climbed into the lead vehicle. My squad leader, Diaz, was already in the passenger seat. He looked at me sideways. Clark, you're bringing a whole convoy for what exactly? I stared straight ahead. Family matter. Diaz raised an eyebrow, but he didn't push it. He knew me well enough to know when not to ask. We didn't load live weapons. This wasn't about intimidation through force, it was about presence. The sheer, undeniable sight of 5 military vehicles rolling deep into a quiet suburban neighborhood was going to make the point for me. On the way out, I grabbed blankets, a thermos of hot tea from the mess hall, and one of those thick military coats for my grandmother. My mind just kept replaying that photo. The dim street lamp above her, the bus station bench, her hands folded in her lap like she was trying to keep herself small. She didn't even look sad in the picture. She just looked resigned. That was worse. We roared out of the base in formation, the engines rumbling low. I sat in the passenger seat, my helmet on, scanning the road. I'd done night missions in hostile territory before, but this felt different. The stakes weren't about national security, they were about her. 20 minutes later, we turned into the bus station lot. It was almost midnight. The place was completely empty except for one flickering light above that bench. And her. Helen was sitting exactly as she was in the photo, except now she had her small floral patterned suitcase next to her. She looked up when she heard the engines, squinting against the glare of the headlights. I jumped out before the vehicle had even stopped moving. Helen. Her face softened in recognition, but then her brows knit together. Sarah, what on earth? I wrapped her in the coat and poured her a cup of tea. She didn't resist, but she kept glancing at the line of Humvees behind me, at the silhouettes of the SEALs standing at ease. Sweetheart, what is all this? Extraction, I said simply. She let out a sound that was half a sigh, half a laugh, shaking her head. You always did have a flair for the dramatic. But I could see her shoulders relax. For the first time since I saw that photo, she wasn't alone. She was surrounded, protected. I loaded her into the lead Humvee myself, making sure she was comfortable. She kept trying to tell me she was fine, that she didn't want to cause any trouble. I didn't answer. My jaw was set. Diaz leaned in. What's next? I looked past him, down the dark road that led toward my parents' neighborhood. We make a stop. The drive there was surreal. The quiet little suburban streets that I used to ride my bike through as a kid now echoed with the low, steady growl of military engines. Curtains twitched in windows, porch lights flicked on. People were peeking through their blinds as the convoy passed. When we turned onto my parents' street, every single light in their house was off. I told the drivers to park in formation, completely blocking the road. The sound alone, 5 Humvees shutting down in perfect sync, was enough to wake up the entire block. Neighbors started stepping out onto their porches in their pajamas, whispering. I left Helen in the Humvee with 2 of my teammates, and then I walked up the driveway. My boots crunched on the gravel. I didn't knock softly. I pounded 3 sharp hits that made the entire door rattle in its frame. Lights came on inside. After a pause, the door cracked open and my father's voice came through, groggy and irritated. Do you have any idea? He stopped cold when he saw me. Then he looked past me, at the vehicles, the uniforms, the silent crowd of operators standing on his street. What the hell is this? He asked, his voice pitching higher. I stepped back just enough so he could see the Humvee right behind me, and Helen sitting inside sipping her tea. His face went pale. You left her at a bus station, I said. It wasn't a question, not an accusation. It was a statement of fact. For a long moment, he didn't answer. He just stood there in his robe, staring at me, then at the convoy, then back at me. Get dressed, I told him, my voice low. You're coming outside. He didn't move. That's when I took one step closer, so close that he had to lean back. You are going to walk down that driveway, and you are going to stand in front of her, and you are going to explain yourself in front of all these witnesses, the neighbors, the squad, and the town that's going to be talking about this for years. He knew I wasn't bluffing. The door stayed half open for a good 10 seconds. I could see the war happening inside my father's head. His pride versus his fear, his control versus this exposure. He had built his entire life on keeping family matters private, on maintaining a certain public image. Now, that image was about to get bulldozed under the headlights of 5 military Humvees. I stepped back, letting the cold night air flow between us. Dad, I said evenly, the longer you stand there, the more you tell the whole block what kind of man you are. His jaw tightened. Behind him, my mother appeared, pulling her robe tighter around her, her eyes darting from me to the street. She looked like she wanted to slam the door shut and pretend none of this was happening, but she couldn't. Not with Helen watching from inside the lead Humvee, and not with 24 neighbors already gathered on their lawns. My father muttered something to my mother, then stepped back inside. I heard drawers opening, the shuffle of clothes. My mother lingered, wringing her hands. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. My voice cut through the night. She sat alone at a bus station in the dark because you decided she wasn't worth the ride home. Her eyes flickered with guilt, but just for a moment. Then the familiar mask of defense slid back into place. It wasn't like that, she whispered. Then come outside and explain what it was like, I said. The door closed. A minute later, my father emerged, now in jeans and a sweater. He looked smaller somehow. His posture was slouched, though his eyes still carried that hard edge. We walked down the driveway together, the hum of quiet conversations rippling through the street. The Seals stood like statues, arms crossed, watching without any expression. The neighbors made space as we approached the Humvee. Helen was looking out the window, her teacup in her hand. When she saw him, she set it down slowly, her hands resting in her lap. I opened the Humvee door, saying, "Out," I told her gently, "and you should hear this in the open." She hesitated, glancing between us, but she stepped down carefully, the cold biting at her cheeks. She stood under the streetlight, that same floral suitcase by her side. "Tell her," I said to my father. He cleared his throat, his gaze sliding away from hers. It wasn't safe for you at home. We thought, No, I interrupted. Because tell her the truth. You didn't want to deal with her. You wanted her out of your way. A murmur rippled through the crowd. My father shot me a sharp look, but I didn't blink. Helen's voice was quiet, but it carried. All I wanted was to spend Christmas with my family, my own son. His jaw flexed. You wouldn't have been comfortable. She gave a small, sad smile. Comfort isn't the point, is it? I stepped forward. This ends tonight. You're going to acknowledge what you did, and you're going to apologize. Right here, right now. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His eyes darted to the Humvees, the Seals, the neighbors, the smartphones that were undoubtedly recording. For a man so obsessed with his reputation, this was the nightmare scenario. When he stayed silent, I motioned to Diaz. The Seal shifted, not in a threatening way, but he was unmistakably present. The sound of his boots on the asphalt was deliberate, a language my father understood all too well. Finally, his shoulders sagged. Mom, I'm sorry. The words sounded like they'd been dragged from his chest with pliers. Helen's eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. She just nodded once. Thank you for saying it, she murmured. Then turning to me, Can we go now, dear? I helped her back into the Humvee. The mission was half over, but my pulse was still pounding. Because this wasn't just about picking her up. This was about showing them, and everyone watching, that the days of quietly sweeping things under the rug were over. I turned back to my parents. She's coming with me. And if you ever try something like this again, I won't just bring a convoy. I'll bring the press. No one spoke. The Seals climbed back into the Humvees. Engines roared to life. The convoy pulled away from the curb, leaving my parents standing alone under that streetlight, the whole neighborhood staring. In the rearview mirror, I saw them shrink into the distance, two figures in the cold, surrounded by whispers they'd never escape. But I wasn't done. Not yet. By morning, the video was everywhere. Someone in the crowd had streamed the entire confrontation live. It spread like wildfire, from the local Facebook groups to regional news stations. By breakfast, my phone was buzzing with messages from reporters asking for comments. I ignored them. I had a different stage in mind. At 10 a.m., I drove Helen to the town hall. She was in a neat wool coat and a scarf I'd bought her years ago, sitting straight backed in the passenger seat of my truck, The convoy of Humvees didn't follow. This time, I didn't need them for intimidation. The damage was already done. Inside, the place was buzzing with activity. Council members shuffled papers. The mayor checked his watch. When I walked in, the murmurs started immediately. People had seen the video. They knew. I'd called ahead, requesting to speak during the public forum. When they finally called my name, I walked to the podium with Helen beside me. "This is my grandmother," I began, my voice steady but carrying. 3 nights ago, she was left sitting alone at a bus station in the cold for hours by her own son and daughter-in-law. There were small gasps in the room. My parents were sitting in the back row, my mother with her arms crossed tight, my father pretending to study the floor. "She's 83, I continued. "She raised 3 children, worked 2 jobs, and never once turned away family when they needed help. And this is how she's repaid." Helen's hand rested lightly on my arm, but she didn't speak. I could feel the weight of her silence, a kind of permission to keep going. "Family isn't just about blood," I said, scanning the room. "It's about showing up. It's about respect. And it's about never, ever abandoning someone who's given you everything." The mayor shifted uncomfortably. I'm not here for sympathy," I cut in. "I'm here for accountability. My parents run a local business. They sit on committees. They smile for photos at charity events. But when no one's looking, they left my grandmother to fend for herself at a bus stop in freezing temperatures." My father's face reddened. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "This town prides itself on community," I said. "So I'm asking, do we mean that, or is it just a slogan on the welcome sign?" The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the heating system. I stepped back from the podium, but I didn't sit down. I stood next to Helen in the center of the room, letting the silence grow. I knew how to use quiet. It's a way to force people to confront the weight of what's been said. After a long moment, the mayor cleared his throat. "On behalf of this council, we condemn the treatment of Mrs. Clark. This is not who we are as a community." He looked toward my parents. "You have something to say?" My father's jaw worked. He glanced at my mother, then at the cameras. Yes, local news had shown up, drawn by the viral video. Finally, he stood. "I apologize to my mother. And to the community, it was a mistake. It won't happen again." I didn't smile. I didn't let him off the hook. "It wasn't a mistake," as I said quietly, but loud enough for the microphones to catch. "It was a choice." The words landed like a stone in still water, ripples of discomfort spreading across the room. When we left, people stopped us in the hallway. Old friends of Helen's, strangers who'd seen the video. They shook her hand, patted her shoulder, told her she deserved better. Outside, under the pale winter sun, she looked at me with a small, tired smile. "You didn't have to do all this," she said. "Yes," I told her. "I did. Because they'll forget if no one makes them remember." She didn't answer right away, then said softly, "They'll remember now." But I wasn't finished. The public apology was a start, not the end. The headlines weren't about to fade quietly. And I had one more move to make, one that would make sure they never tried to erase her again. 2 days after the town hall, the story had taken on a life of its own. It wasn't just a local family dispute anymore. It had turned into a talking point about elder neglect, respect, and what it means to protect your own. Morning radio hosts debated it, a state senator tweeted about it, and my parents, they were getting calls they didn't like from business partners, committee chairs, even old friends who didn't want to be seen standing next to them. I could have stopped there. The apology was on record. The town had seen them humbled, and Helen was safe. But I kept thinking about that photo, the one of her sitting alone at the bus station, the way her hands were folded in her lap, the way her coat looked too thin for the cold. That image had burned itself into my memory, and I wanted to make sure it burned into theirs too. That's why I called in one last favor from my unit. On a quiet Saturday afternoon, my parents' street filled with the deep, rumbling growl of diesel engines. Not one Humvee this time. Not 5, but 3 Humvees and 2 massive military transport trucks. No weapons, no intimidation, just presence. We parked along the curb in a perfect line. Uniformed Navy SEALs stepped out, not armed, but in their full dress blues. Each carried something in their hands. At the center of the formation, I walked forward with Helen on my arm. She wore the same scarf from the town hall, and for the first time in weeks, her hair was done the way she used to like it, neat and dignified. My parents were already standing on their porch, confusion written all over their faces. Neighbors peeked through curtains. A few even stepped out onto their lawns. When we stopped at the foot of the driveway, I turned to the men and women behind me. In perfect formation, the SEALs lined up, 3 to each side of us. Then at my signal, they turned to face my parents. "This," I said, my voice carrying across the quiet street, "is the family my grandmother deserved the night you left her at that bus station. This is the respect you refused to show her." One by one, the SEALs stepped forward and placed their items on the driveway. A folded blanket, a thermos of hot tea, a pair of warm gloves, an umbrella, a flashlight, a handwritten note that read, "You are never alone." I could see my mother's throat working, her eyes darting to the neighbors, the cameras, the growing crowd. My father's hands were shoved deep in his pockets, but I noticed the twitch in his jaw. "Helen doesn't need your money," I said, looking at them both. "She doesn't need your approval. What she needs, what she's always deserved, is your presence, your respect. And when you failed to give it, others stepped in." I stepped closer, my boots crunching on the driveway. "You can't erase what you did. You can't take back that night. But you can remember it. Every time you see these things," I gestured to the driveway, "you'll remember exactly who had to show up in your place." The SEALs turned sharply back toward the street, but before they left, I gave one final command: honor. As one, they dropped to a knee before my grandmother. Not for me, not for the spectacle, but for her. The woman who had survived a Depression-era childhood, raised a family, worked until her hands ached, and still had kindness to give. The street was silent except for the sound of someone's phone recording video. Then I took Helen's hand, helped her into the lead Humvee, and we rolled away. I didn't look back, but I knew they were still standing there. My parents, watching the convoy disappear, with the eyes of the entire neighborhood on them. They would never admit it out loud, but I knew that image. That moment, they'd never forget it, and that was the point. The videos hit the internet before we even made it back to Helen's place. Someone had filmed the whole thing. The convoy rolling down the street, the SEALs forming up, the gifts being placed on the driveway the moment they knelt. By the time I helped Helen inside, my phone was buzzing non-stop. By nightfall, the clip had over 1 million views. The comment section was flooded with strangers from all over the country, veterans, grandkids, even nurses who worked in elder care. Some were angry on Helen's behalf, some shared their own stories of neglect and family betrayal, and some simply said, "This is how you honor someone who raised you." The local news anchor called me for an interview. National outlets picked it up. It wasn't about embarrassing my parents anymore. It had become a conversation about dignity, duty, and what families owe to the people who built them. Helen didn't care much for the attention. She'd laugh and say, "I'm too old to be famous." But I caught her sitting up straighter, smiling more often. The sparkle in her eyes returned. She started baking again, and on Sundays, she'd hum the old songs she used to sing while cooking when I was a kid. My parents didn't speak to me for weeks, but I know they saw the headlines. I know they heard the whispers in church and at the country club. They'd wanted to keep things quiet. I'd made sure the world knew instead. A month later, I got a letter. It wasn't from them, at least not directly. It was from my mother's sister. She wrote that they were rethinking a few things, that maybe they'd lost sight of what family is supposed to be. I didn't respond. Not yet. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Instead, I focused on Helen. We took drives along the coast. We sat in the back garden drinking tea in the cool evenings. I even took her onto the base one day, introduced her to the unit. She laughed when one of the younger SEALs asked if she'd ever consider joining the Navy. And here's the thing, I didn't do all of this just to punish my parents. I did it because I wanted Helen to see, to feel that she was worth fighting for, that no matter who failed her, she would always have someone ready to stand up, show up, and protect her. Looking back, I realized that day at the bus station could have gone so differently if I hadn't checked my messages, if I hadn't made those calls, if I'd let my parents' words set the course. but I didn't. Because when someone you love is left out in the cold, you don't just walk past, you turn around, you go back, you make it right, and you make sure the people responsible remember exactly why they'll never get the chance to do it again. To anyone hearing this, maybe you've got your own bus station moment buried somewhere in your memory. Maybe it wasn't about a grandparent. Maybe it was a friend, a neighbor, someone who once stood by you when no one else did. If that person's still here, call them, visit them, show up. Not because the world is watching, but because that's what decent people do. And if someone in your life has forgotten how to honor the ones who came before them, well, remind them loudly if you have to. Because respect isn't something you ask for, it's something you give. And sometimes it's something you fight for. This is my story. That was my grandma. And this was the day the whole world remembered her name.